Hey everyone, Cobba here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make one of these. So in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make a 3-switch Rapidstrike Loom. This is just going to be the loom itself, and in future videos I'm going to show you how to install aftermarket wheels, aftermarket motors, pushers, a whole variety of different things. But for this video I'm just going to be focusing on the loom itself, and this is pretty much going to be the hardest video I could ever make, so I thought get it out of the way first and it'll be smooth sailing. So let's get straight into it. Here are the tools you will need. 18 AWG wire, some heat shrink, I have red and black, Dean's connector and your 3 switches, snips and wire strippers, some solder, lead free is better, hot glue gun, soldering iron handy hands, these are an absolute lifesaver, soldering iron or station, and a Dremel. Here is a complete 3-switch setup. We have our rev switch, trigger switch, and pusher return. The whole idea of a 3-switch setup is to have the pusher return after firing. This will prevent any pusher jams and give you a much smoother experience. So, let's get to work. Firstly, let's start by taking apart the blaster. First mod I'm going to do is a quick battery tray mod, where you take out the 2 screws that hold out the battery tray together, allowing us to fit in the larger lipo. Now let's disassemble all the wires from the flywheel cage, trigger assembly, and pusher mech, right down until they're bare plastic. I'm keeping everything from our trigger assembly, pusher mech, and flywheel cage. Here is roughly where our switches will be mounted. The bottom switch for our rev trigger, middle switch for our main trigger, which will actuate the pusher, and our third switch for the pusher mech, which will make sure the pusher mech has returned all the way once stopped firing. Now let's Dremel out area for our switches to mount. This may take a little while and tweaking for your switch setup, but take your time. I'm shortening my trigger switch to fit better into the trigger assembly. Let's keep Dremeling. Now we have enough room for our trigger switch to be nice and snug. In order for these new switches to fit, on the other side of the shell we have to take out some of the posts. Use some snips to do this. I'm sanding away some of the rev switch in order for it to fit with our bigger micro switch. Cut these 2 posts on the Rapidstrike's opposite shell. Now we can start Dremeling away for our third switch. The whole purpose of making a 3-switch loom is so that the pusher mech always returns after firing the last dart. This makes it easy on reloads and doesn't put any strain on the pusher mech and your darts, and allows the pusher to always return after firing. As you can see, it fits in nice and snug. Here are the trimmed down rev switch and trigger. You have to play around with your switches in order to find the right length for your triggers to be filed down to. You can now hot glue the switches in. You can do this after, or you can do this now. I did it now so I can size up the right amount of wire for how much I need. Always test to make sure. Now to file away some of the other side of the trigger assembly, so it can accommodate our larger switches. Alright guys, so if you just followed those steps there and just watched me make this, you'll be up to this stage now. I've got my 3 switches mounted inside my trigger grouping here. So rev switch down the bottom there, clicking nicely. Trigger up the top, clicking nicely as well. And here is our pusher return switch as well. So I'm very happy with how this one turned out. This one here, especially the trigger switch, that was so cool how that fits right there. It's like it was perfectly snug. And the acceleration switch is nice. They've got good pull to them, so they're not a hair trigger, but they're not really long as well. So they've got a good length to them where you can have some decent control, ease on the firing a bit, and then just press it. Sorry about that, my lipo alarm just decided to go off. So yeah, that's it. That was probably the most tedious thing you're going to do in this whole How to. The trigger grouping is one of the hardest things to do and get right. It takes a lot of precision and getting everything right. Up the top we've still got to make the guide that'll push this switch down when the trigger returns. That'll be at the end of the video once we're getting all the wiring done. Another great little thing to test out is put the trigger grouping that you just made inside the Rapidstrike and just make sure they're still all clicking and working, which mine are. Very happy with those. But yeah, so you've done all your switches now, let's get into the wiring. Let's take a closer look at the Dean's connector. The horizontal plug is the positive plug, and the negative plug is the vertical plug. Solder to the shorter connections on the back. Let's look at our micro switch. This is what I actuate our pusher mech and our flywheels. The first tab is the common tab, or the power tab. The middle tab is the normally open, allowing power to flow through when the switch isn't depressed. And the final tab is the normally closed, which allows power to go through when the switch is pressed. I'm putting some of the components back into the blaster to size up my wire correctly. First, let's start with the positive cable that will connect to our Dean's connector and run to the common tab on our rev switch. Size up the wire and cut. Strip the wire, cut some heat shrink and slip it over the wire. Size up the wires correctly on the handy hands if available. After soldering, slip the heat shrink on and heat shrink. Next, our negative wire that will run from the flywheel cage. Strip, heat shrink. Tin your wires first to allow a better connection. Then reheat the solder for it to stay in place. Apply your heat shrink and shrink. My Dean's connector has this grey piece that allows me to have better grip on the lipo plug. Slip it on now if you have it. Now insert that into the blaster. Our positive cable from the lipo will go to the common plug on our switch. Twist the wire like so for a better connection. This allows it to easily slip into the terminal. Slip in and solder. Don't forget your heat shrink. Next, we're running a diode that'll go from the normally open on the rev switch to the normally open on the trigger switch. We also need to run a wire from the normally open from the rev switch to the flywheels. Size up these two pieces of wire and cut. Strip and twist the two pieces together, like so. Pre-soldering makes this a lot easier. Then solder to the normally open on your rev switch. Do not solder this wire yet. We need to run a wire from the normally open on the trigger switch to the normally closed on the pusher switch. Size up your piece of wire and cut. It takes a little fiddling around with this switch, but you will find a way to put them on. I use the screwdriver to persuade the wires. It's not the prettiest, but it will work. Now solder the wires together. Repeat for the normally closed on the pusher switch. Now run a wire from the normally closed on your trigger switch to the common of your pusher switch. Slide on the heat shrink. Twist your wires into the terminals. Solder. And heat shrink. Repeat for the common on the pusher switch. This is what your loom should look like. Alright, so that brings us to the end of switch to switch wiring. The rest of the wiring will include me wiring two actual motors. Now in this video I'm just going to wire it to the stock motors, and in another video in the future I'm going to be showing you how to properly install 180s and 130 motors. So if you've got those motors and you want to chuck them in now and you know how to do it, go right ahead, not stopping you. For this video I'm just going to be wiring to the stock motors, plus who doesn't want to burn out a couple stock motors? First, take a wire from the normally closed tab on your trigger switch to the pusher motor. Size up the wire, wire strip, heat shrink, and solder it on. It doesn't matter what tab you solder the wire to the pusher mech, as it's going to perform the same. Solder this with the pusher mech motor inside the actual pusher mech, otherwise you will have to take your wires back off. Next, we're running a negative wire from the pusher switch to the flywheels and running a negative wire from the pusher motor to the pusher switch. These will be soldered onto the normally open tab. Size up the wire strip. To solder these two wires to the same tab, pre-solder the two wires together as we've previously done. Then simply reheat the two wires back onto the tab. Don't forget to heat shrink. Take the negative wire back to your pusher motor and put the pusher motor back in its place. We are now finished with the pusher motor. Do not solder to the flywheels yet. Now let's look at our flywheels. In order for the darts to go at the front of the blaster, the bottom motor needs to be spinning anti-clockwise and the top motor needs to be spinning clockwise. In order for this to happen, we need to put the positive wire at the front and the negative wire on the back two terminals. Size up the wire for your positive and negative. Wire strip. For the flywheel wire, we need to expose some wire in the middle. To do this, put the wire in the middle of your wire strippers, trim the ends, and they should look like this. It might take a little while to do this, but keep your patience and they will turn out like this. First, our positive wire to the two front terminals. Size it up and solder on. They might need to be contorted to fit on. Repeat for the negative wire. And there we have it. Take the normally open from the rev switch to the positive on the flywheels. Then take the negative from the pusher return switch to the flywheels negative. We will also run the lipo negative wire to the flywheels negative terminal to complete the circuit. Get the two negative wires and twist them together, then wrap them underneath the terminal we created and loop them round like so, then drown it in solder. Repeat for our positive wire. And there you have it, all the wiring is complete. All that's left to be made is a little riser for our pusher return switch, so when the pusher does return, it can depress the switch and the loom will know the pusher has returned. I'm using some scrap acrylic I have lying around. It's 5mm in thickness and I need to use 2 layers of acrylic. Depending on what switch you're using and how close you mounted it, figure out how much material you need. I'm going to cut it out using my bandsaw. Simply hot glue the smaller piece on top of the larger piece. Then hot glue those two pieces onto the switch. Some sanding and sculpting may be required and a lot of testing. Make sure your pusher can return and depress the switch. If it's not a smooth contraction, your pusher may jam up. So take your time and figure it out. And there you have it, a 3-switch Rapidstrike Loom complete with a pusher return switch. You can now put everything back into your blaster, screw it all together, and we're done. Once it's put back together, you're pretty much going to have yourself a nice rewired Rapidstrike. So we've pretty much done this rewire so we can accommodate our bigger battery for higher voltage, so we can... So I'll just give you a quick test fire now. For comparison, this is a stock Rapidstrike with a 6 clip, and this is our modified Rapidstrike with a 12 mag. Modified Rapidstrike. As you can see, a much bigger difference from the stock to the modified, all thanks to that big lipo battery and our rewire. Next video, I'm going to be showing you how to install aftermarket motors, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I'm just going to burn these out. So, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video. So, for a comparison, this is a stock Rapidstrike. Fuck.